Welcome to today's lesson on adding and subtracting mixed numbers with like denominators. Today we'll be continuing to use different concepts or skills that we've used in previous lessons. So make sure you refer back to your math notes as well as the videos that we've had this week and last week. When you're adding and subtracting mixed numbers, you pretty much follow the rules that we had when it was just fractions. The first step is you add or subtract the fractions first. And remember, you're going to add or subtract the numerators, but keep the denominator the same. Then you add or subtract the whole numbers. And number 3, if your answer is improper, you change it to a mixed number. And number 4, if your answer is not in lowest terms, you're going to reduce it. So let's go ahead, and these are the same notes that you have in your notebook. Let's go ahead and take a look at a sample problem. So I have the problem 4 3/5 plus 6 4/5. So I'm going to do exactly what number 1 says, and I'm going to add the fractions first. Remember, I want to keep the denominator the same. My denominator is 5, so I'm going to put that right down since I'm just going to keep that the same. And 3 plus 4 is 7. Now I can go to step 2 and I can add or subtract the whole numbers. In this case I'm adding, so 4 plus 6 is 10. Now I have to ask myself 2 key questions. Is any part of my answer an improper fraction? And I can see right here that 7/5 is an improper fraction. And I don't want to leave it that way, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change that. Remember, we did this in a previous lesson already. So I'm going to take that 7 and divide it by 5. 5 can go in a 7 one time, and 1 times 5 is 5. 7 minus 5 is 2, and that 2 is going to become my numerator. And remember, my denominator is going to stay the same. So 7/5 is indeed equal to 1 2/5. I'm not finished yet. The only thing I did was I converted my improper fraction into 1 2/5. I still have the 10. So I have to add that 10 with the 1 2/5. And when I do that, I get 11 2/5, because 2/5 plus nothing is 2/5, and 10 plus the 1 is 11. So when I rewrite 4 3/5 plus 6 4/5, my answer is 11 2/5. Let's take a look at another problem. I have 2 1/10 plus 1 5/10. So I know that I'm going to remember to add my fractions together, and when I add and subtract fractions, my denominator stays the same. So because I have a 10 in both mixed numbers, I can go ahead and add. I'm just going to copy that denominator down. And 1 plus 5 is 6. So I have 6/10. Now I can go ahead and add my whole numbers. 2 plus 1 is 3. Now I have to remember to ask myself those 2 key questions. The first question is the fraction in my mixed number improper? When I look at 6/10, no, that is not improper, because the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So it's okay. The next question I have to ask myself is, can my fraction be reduced? And when I look at 6/10, I know that that can be reduced because it's not in lowest terms. Remember, in our previous lessons, we've learned that we could reduce through prime factorization or through finding the greatest common factor. I could also think about what the largest number is that divides into both 6 and 10. I know that I could take 6/10, and if I found the greatest common factor, it would, of 6 and 10, it would be 2. So remember that golden rule of fractions. What you do to one, you must do to the other. So I'm going to divide them by their greatest common factor, which is 2. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. So 6/10 in lowest terms is 3/5. And that was only the part that I fixed with the 3/5. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write my 3, which just stayed the same. I didn't have to do any changing to that. And now my 3/5. So 3 and 6/10 is equal to 3 and 3/5. This answer that I had is correct, but you do want to go through and reduce your fraction to lowest terms. So both of these answers are correct, but this one is the best because it's been reduced to lowest terms. Now let's take a look at a subtraction problem with mixed numbers where the denominators are the same. I can go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing. It says, number 1, add or subtract the fractions first. So remember, I'm going to keep the denominator the same, and I'm just going to copy that 9 down. And then I can look and see if I can subtract. 7 minus 4, yep, I can do that. And 7 minus 4 is 3. Now I'm going to go ahead and subtract my whole numbers. 8 minus 5 is 3. Now again, the same two questions I have to ask myself is number 3 is if my answer is improper. And if I look here at that 3/9, nope, that is not improper because the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So that's okay. But now I have to ask myself, can the fraction part of my mixed number be reduced? And if I go ahead and I find the greatest common factor, I will see that it is not 1, which means that I do need to go through and reduce these numerator and denominator. The 3, I'm just going to bring down here because I don't have to do any kind of reducing or anything to that. I'm going to go over to the side and I'm going to put what my greatest common factor is. My greatest common factor is, for 3 and 9, is 3. Because when I did found all of the factors and then found out what was in common and circled the greatest one for 3 and 9, it was 3. So when I go ahead and I divide that, 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to bring it right over here. I have 3 and 1/3. So 3 and 3/9 was solved correctly, but again, I don't want to ever leave my fraction where it's not in lowest terms. So 3 and 1/3 is the best answer. Now let's take a look at subtracting mixed numbers with regrouping. That is just when you have to borrow, when you don't have it in a proper way to go ahead and subtract. The first step is if your bottom numerator is larger than the numerator you are subtracting from, you have to borrow from the whole number. So in this case, we could not go ahead right now and subtract. Not yet, at least. We can go ahead and we can bring down the 8 because remember, when you subtract or add, the denominators stay the same. So I bring that denominator down and it's going to stay the 8. But I cannot subtract 6 from 1. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to borrow 1 whole. The 7 is going to become a 6. And that 1 whole that I'm going to borrow is going to come over to the 1/8. In order to do that, look at step 3. It says regroup the fraction by adding the numerator and the denominator. This will be your new numerator and your denominator will stay the same. So if we add the 8 plus that 1, I'll get 9. So now this is going to be equal to 9/8. let's pause there for a moment and take a look at this. Okay, let's look at these little pictures here to help us understand what happened. We had 7 and 1/8, but we could not subtract in our problem because we couldn't take 6 away from 1. Now, I have here 7 whole things and 1/8. Now, I couldn't subtract the 6/8 from the 1/8, so I'm going to borrow. So the 7 became 6. And then we added our numerator and denominator and we got 9. Let's take a look at how we did that. So we're going to borrow one of those 7s. And I've got to cut it up into 8 pieces because that's my denominator. That's how many parts are in the whole thing. So if I go ahead and I divide that up into 8 pieces, we can see I now have 6. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 whole things. And I have, let's count the parts. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 8 pieces. And that's how we got 6 and 9/8. All we did was we just borrowed. It's still the same exact thing. We still have the same amount of pieces. It just looks a little differently once we regrouped. Now I can go ahead and subtract. 9 minus 6 is 3. And 6 minus 2 is 4. Now remember, I go back and I want to look and ask myself those 2 key questions. Is my fraction improper? Nope, it's perfectly fine. And the second question is, I want to reduce my answer if possible. But when I look at the 3/8, the greatest common factor would be 1, because 3 only has 1 and 3, and 8 has 1, 2, and 4. The only factor they share in common is 1, therefore I'm done, and my answer is 4 and 3/8. Any questions? Make sure to see your teacher, and don't forget to use your notes as your resource, and go back and watch the video if you need to. Happy solving!